Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to yet another episode in the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour's special series on the REINS Act, the REINS Act in Focus. I'm your host, Andrew Langer, and joining us today, right now, is Stephen Johnson. He is the fellow in the Center for Practical Federalism at the State Policy Network. We just spoke with his colleague, Ben Wilterdink. And I know I butchered it, Steve. Did I butcher it? Did I butcher the title?
You got it exactly right.
Oh, there you go. See, that's the we try. So this is great because I literally at the tail end of my conversation with Ben, I quoted a 1992 Supreme Court case, New York versus United States, which I've quoted throughout this series. It tends to be a North Star for me in terms of how I approach public policy. And among other things, the case says, federalism secures to individuals the liberties that derive from the diffusion of sovereign power. And this gets to the heart of the REINS Act, both at the federal level, because it serves to, both at the federal level and the state level, because it serves to diffuse executive branch power. Talk about this and talk about this in the context of practical federalism and the work that you're doing for SPIN.
Yeah, so
I know there's a lot there.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. So obviously, REINS, basically trying to say we want to limit the scope that the administrative state, the power that they have. And I think most people agree they probably have too much power. Now, when your person is in power, you might be fine with it. You might be okay to let them have it. But I think when you see the other side is in power, all of a sudden you aren't as big of a fan of it. I think a couple weeks ago, they had the No Kings rally.
Right.
And I was thinking about the REINS Act and saying, if this wasn't all just political posturing and just talk, hopefully they'd say, we support the REINS Act because we don't want Donald Trump to be able to unilaterally do all of this. Now, I suspect it's probably mostly talk and political posturing, and they're probably not actually going to support the REINS Act.
But
go ahead.
No, wow. I mean, it's so funny because we've done, almost 25 of these special episodes as you and I are talking. And not that we want to get political on this, but you raise a really interesting point because even if we don't get all of the folks who are attending the No More Kings rallies, but let's say we got 5%, 10%, 20%, 1 in 5 people going, you say, hey, how about this? How about if you're concerned about overarching concentrated power in the federal executive branch, here's one way to diffuse it. I mean, that could be a real game changer. I mean, it gets to the heart of what I've asked everybody, just about everybody on this podcast, as to why, folks on the other side of the traditional aisle from regulatory reform would be in favor of it. I think you've crystallized it. Talk some more about this as I've rudely interrupted you.
No. If what people are saying, if they're true believers that they don't think we should have a king, which obviously that's what we think,
right,
then it would make sense to say when you have a regulation that has, and we could debate what the dollar amount is, but when it has an outsized impact on the economy, you say, one person, one administration shouldn't be able to just unilaterally do that. It should have to be voted on, right? That's the democracy part of our country. Now, if you just don't like the current person in charge and you're completely fine with having the power when you're in charge, then you're probably not going to support this. If the rally isn't No Kings, but, hey, I want to be the king or I want to pick the king, maybe that's a different thing.
No kings, but a premier is fine. No kings.
Yes.
But the general secretary of the Communist Party, that's fine. This is essentially what no kings, but a generalissimo in charge. This is what we're talking about. We don't want any single person or any one small group of people to have this power, do we?
Right. Unless it's me, right? That's sort of everyone's.
No, but something. Even I don't. Something. Well, maybe you. I don't want that level of power. But you were a legislator, correct? I mean, this is so you've seen this firsthand.
Yeah, no, I was a state rep for 6 years, and power absolutely it gets to you. I mean, it really does, and I always sort of say. I'm a big fan of term limits. I know that's a whole separate conversation, but one of my arguments for it is it's good for the lawmaker to have to step away because when you have that power for so long, it's not good for the soul. I think it's good to have to step back. And the same thing with REINS Act. It's not good for one person to be able to have that kind of power. And if you like the policy, if you love the regulation that you're doing, there should be value in saying, I want Congress to back me up. I don't want to just, as president, say, I believe we should have this regulation. I should be able to sell it to the people that were elected by their constituents and say, hey, here's what I think would be a good regulation on air pollution. Make your case and have it voted on. And now you've got the support of the people, really, right? When
Right.
Congress can back you, it's more likely to have support and actually do something rather than, hey, I got an office and I'm going to jam my agenda through. Who cares what Congress thinks? That's not healthy for our republic.
It's interesting because I was just talking with Jonathan Adler about this, professor at formerly at Case Western, now coming into William and Mary. And he raised the point, and a couple of others have raised this issue, which is it also has the ancillary impacts. Again, we talk about practical federalism, practical solutions to things within the construct of our government, of forcing some level of cooperation between the executive branch and the legislative branch in terms of crafting a policy that might actually pass muster, but also have the possibility of depoliticizing, taking the power out of the courts, right? Again, part of the No More Kings movement. And again, not to cast aspersions on the No More Kings movement. I mean, look, these are questions that we need to be talking about. Is the issue of do our courts have too much power? And again, if it's folks you don't like who have the power in those courts, you're going to say yes. But this helps to sort of defang some of that power, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is also kind of a side tangent, but I've been very supportive of a lot of the executive orders that President Trump has done. But I also been sort of saying Congress should be doing this.
Right.
I like a lot of the policies that are coming from them. But from a practical standpoint, they'll be gone in 4 years with a different president potentially. And also, I didn't like when President Obama did all these
Right.
EOs. And so part of me says, Congress, do your job. I think Congress, they love power, but they hate responsibility. And so they love to be able
Mm.
to say, hey, we got a lot of power, we get to do a lot of stuff. But when it really comes down to it and say, all right, we want you to be responsible. We want you to be the one that has to make these decisions. They shirk it off. They want
Right.
nothing to do with that. They'd rather, because it's tough. When you make a vote like that, now you got to go back to your district and you've got to explain it. It's a lot easier to not take a vote and get reelected.
Right.
So, in the same thing with the REINS Act, I think there's a lot of these regulations. When you start to say we got to regulate some sort of pollution, you're going to compromise. You got to be able to work together. No one's going to be happy. You're going to probably make someone mad, but that's the process. That's what you
The
signed up
job.
for.
Right.
That's the job.
Yeah.
And so many in Congress don't want that. I think that's the REINS Act. There's presidents that don't want to do it, right? Because it's sort of an infringement on their power. But the bigger problem is I think Congress doesn't want to do it because they don't actually want that responsibility.
Right.
And
They want
that's something that we have to change.
they want the trappings of power, the social media followers, the hits on the TV news, whether it's national or federal, to go out to the various cocktail parties and do their things, to eventually write a book, blah blah blah, and so on and so forth. But when it comes down to right, and this is the issue, it was really crystallized in the wake of the Loper Bright relentless decision last year in the Supreme Court, overturning the Chevron doctrine and essentially saying, Congress, you have to do your job. The immediate reaction on the part of some was to create a Stop Corporate Capture Act that would push this legislative decision making out of the legislature and back into the federal executive branch or away from the legislative branch. I mean, this is what you're talking about, isn't it, Stephen? This idea of going out of their way to avoid the responsibility here.
Yes, and I kind of want to dovetail this into
Please.
the states, right? So at the
Yes.
Center for Practical Federalism, we try to work with states and say, all right, how can you protect yourself against federal overreach? And obviously, everyone sees the big cases when, states are suing the federal government, and that's all well and fine. We try to find, are there other means that the federal government is sort of coercing you?
Right.
And we get a lot from the federal bureaucracy to the state bureaucracy. Federal bureaucrats love
Yes.
what we call state bureaucrats. And generally, so you think, there's a host of programs that are federal programs but administered by the state, Medicaid being a large one. And so what happens is you can imagine you're a state bureaucrat, you're just doing your job, you get this call, and the federal government is recommending you do this new regulation. And so they just blindly follow and do that, right? They're keeping their job. And that's why we support doing a REINS Act at the state
Love
level,
it.
and because we want that legislative oversight over their state bureaucrats.
One of my favorite examples of this is, the EPA in the wake of the Clean Air Act amendments. They have passed these new regulations on ambient air quality standards for dust and particulate matter. And what that meant was at the state level, a bunch of rural businesses were forced to pave over their gravel and dirt parking lots in order to abate for dust. And then a couple of years later, all of these parking lots were now impervious surface. The EPA comes out with a new rule on stormwater management and stormwater water quality. And what do the states do? They start passing rain taxes, taxing these businesses on their impervious surface areas. And so you were damned if you did, and you were damned if you didn't. And at the end of the day, this is what we're talking about. Sort of, in one way, conflicting mandates that come out. The federal government comes down, and as I said to Ben, excrement rolls downhill or flows downhill. The states are the ones, and the localities are the ones that pick up the brunt, don't they?
Yes, and look, trying to get Congress to change is very difficult, but getting states to adopt a REINS Act, that's doable. That's very possible. We've
Yeah.
seen, a number of states do that, and that puts the legislature back in charge. It gives some sort of an eye on some of these regulations that are coming through, and it's a way to protect yourself against federal overreach. If you love the regulation they're pushing, fine, go vote on it, put it in. This shouldn't be a blue state or a red state issue.
Right.
In fact, my guess is a lot of people in California would have no problem voting for it, but they should vote on it. It shouldn't
Right.
be an unelected, faceless bureaucrat that we never know, we never see. It should be the person that knocks on my door and asks for my vote and has to, earn that vote. That's who should be responsible for it.
If you're out there protesting and you're directing your state attorneys general to fight against the current federal government, this is something you should be advocating for. Stephen, how do folks find out more about the Center for Practical Federalism at the State Policy Network?
Yeah, so we have a federalism scorecard where we rank the states on how well they are and protecting themselves. It's at federalismscorecard.com, federalismscorecard.com. Go and see where your state ranks. You might be surprised. It's not all the red states are good and blue states are bad. It's actually, there's a pretty good mix there.
You know something, we're going to have to get you back for a long form interview on the lunch hour. We do these 30 to 45-minute interviews. We'd love to sit down with you and pick your brain about the work you guys are doing. Because again, federalism, vitally important issue to me. Stephen Johnson, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Our guest has been Stephen Johnson. He is a senior fellow, heads up the Center for Practical Federalism at the State Policy Network. Go and check them out. This has been yet another episode in our ongoing series focused on the REINS Act from the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.